unseen forces were attacking me, and one of them took my head and smacked it on the table. That was a scary dream I had this past week, and it was one of those scary weeks. I don't know if you get them, but you wake up with real anxiety. I was not going to keep sleeping with this one. I had real anxiety, and but in the dream, I could feel these really horrible forces, and in the dream, I prayed the Lord's Prayer, and eventually I found myself out in a field holding a cross. And the dream was really intense, and then the eerie part, though, of the dream was as when I woke up, I could feel like vibrations in my body. So it was like, this is really scary. And the scariness stayed with me even when I woke up. And so it made me think about, wow, we have anxiety in our daily life. We can have anxiety in our dreams. What's the role of anxiety and evil? And how does it all fit into our life? And are there anything we can do to deal with our anxiety and a sense of evil sometimes that we might feel? So that's what I want to talk about today. And I would say probably one of the most common questions I've had as a pastor, but also really as a coach, people have asked me through the years, like, is there any strategies for dealing with anxiety? Anxiety is really on the rise, and people are really struggling with it, particularly when it has that dreaded evil feel that I had in that dream. So today I want to talk about anxiety and evil and how we can confront it. And it's nothing particularly new. It's been with humanity for all of history. If you remember, Jesus said to the disciples at one point, don't be anxious about tomorrow. So people have been anxious about tomorrow forever. That's just part of the human experience. And there's not a lot bad about anxiety necessarily, but when anxiety overcomes us and takes us over, that's another thing. Now, the presence of evil, which is more on the spiritual level, is another challenge. And while anxiety can feel horrible, it doesn't necessarily have to deal with evil. But evil definitely, when it works in our lives, does play on our anxieties. So I want to talk about the connections. Now, as we've evolved in humanity, we've developed science and we've developed psychology. And I want to talk about the fact that at one point in the history of the world, everybody would describe whatever was happening to you in terms of spiritual things. That's just how they saw everything. And then for like the last 200 years, that's gone. And now, today, even using the expression evil spirits would sound like, that's really weird. It's really outdated. It doesn't make any sense. So we've gone from one extreme to the other. What I think is now we're coming to a new period, a new age, where we can integrate the two, and we can look at the best of psychology and the best of spiritual knowledge and deal with our anxieties and forebodings and the evil feelings we might feel. So I'm going to talk about ways that they're connected. Now, this connection between psychology and spiritual thinking, I think, is emerging much more right now. There's a book out called The Anxious Generation right now by Jonathan Haidt, and he is showing that we've had record levels of anxiety among young people, particularly young women, in the last particularly 5 to 10 years, and it's off the charts. If you talk to anybody who's running a school or a president of a college, they cannot keep up with the mental health needs of the students that are coming in. So mental health and that sort of stress is erupting at very high levels. Haidt, in his book, makes a very compelling case that it has a lot to do with smartphones. And while I think that's a piece of it, it's an important piece of it, I think it's a little bit more, it's more complicated. There are other forces at work that are going on, but I think that's one in particular. But what was striking in his book, and I know Jonathan Haidt through the years, I've known him well. Jonathan is culturally Jewish, but atheist. But in this book, I was a little surprised that he takes a whole section to talk about the power of spirituality and religion in dealing with it. And he has a quote that he says, "The phone-based life," which is the focus of his book, "produces a spiritual degradation, not just in adolescence, but in all of us." So he's making the connection. But I find it's interesting that Jonathan is using the language of spirituality. That's why I do see this bridge taking place, that we can look at our anxious thoughts, both spiritually and psychologically. And I like that he's doing that. He also says in an interview recently that he's atheist, and he says, but I'm still an atheist, but nowadays I'm one who finds a lot to admire in religion and religious communities. So we're seeing this, I think, this mutual respect. Another scientist that, scholar, psychologist that influenced me was a man named William Van Dusen. He wrote a book called The Presence of Spirits in Madness. Now, I'm probably one of the only people in the world whose father, thank you, Dad, kept a book like that around the house. I read it when I was 14. And yes, I was a really nerdy kid. I mean, what kid wants to read a book like that? At 14, I found it absolutely fascinating, and it really changed the way I looked at psychology. But I was engrossed with it, and it's a great book to read. But just a bit about William Van Dusen, because he's another one of these people that's bridging psychology and faith. He's a PhD in clinical psychology, and he was the chief psychologist at Mendocino State Hospital in California for 17 years. And after dealing with hundreds of patients, he eventually begins a medical practice of actually speaking directly to the hallucinations of schizophrenics. And he's discovering that there's a presence there that's beyond just in the person's mind. There's something else going on, which he would call evil spirits. And then he discovers Swedenborg, and he says, though I noticed the similarities with Swedenborg's description of the relationship of man to spirits, it was only 3 years after all the major findings on hallucinations had been made that I saw the striking similarity between the 20th century patients described and Swedenborg's 18th century accounts. So again, we're seeing that he makes this connection between what we would call evil spirits and this kind of dread and anxiety that rests with us. So I think we're seeing the bridge, and we can then look at best practices for how we could deal with this. And I want to look at those right now. And I want to integrate the two worlds of psychology and spiritual thinking. So if you've been to a therapist, if you've been in any kind of counseling and you have anxiety, there's a number of strategies to deal with it, depending on the therapist. But I'm going to summarize what I found were probably the top 7 strategies that people could use based on psychology. And the first one is relaxation, breathing, and meditation. That's one thing that they're recommending. A second is a healthy diet. The third is exercise. The fourth is joining a support group. The fifth is asking for help. And the sixth is avoid drugs and alcohol. And the seventh is, if these fail, consider medications. So I think these all make perfect sense. I don't think any of these are new to anybody here. No one's saying, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. These are pretty standard ways at psychology. But now I want to take it a little bit deeper and look at the spiritual causes below the surface and recognize that we're spiritual beings in a physical world. And we're impacted by spirits who have passed over from this earth. Some good, some bad. So what do we call the good ones? We call them angels, angelic presence, and we call the bad guys evil spirits, and they're real. Evil spirits serve a spiritual purpose in our life. Even in my little dream that I started the sermon with. Why are they allowed? Why do we have these anxious, dreaded, evil thoughts? Why do they come into our mind? They come into our mind because we are in a process of growing through and developing our spiritual life. And it's sort of like a gym or a school. The more we develop our spiritual life, the more actually, this is paradoxical, it's kind of frustrating, right? The more we grow spiritually, the greater sometimes the evil presence can be in our life. It can come after us in greater form, and we have that greater power to overcome it. That's why that passage from 1 Corinthians that Ross read earlier said, God will never give you a temptation that God is not working through with you. You're never alone in those temptations. But we all face temptations. That's the only way we grow spiritually, is through temptation, overcoming it, working through it. It's a painful process. It's what the life is. But life will have suffering. It will have struggle. It will have temptations. And we turn to God spiritually through those times, and we grow through it. We grow to a higher level of spiritual growth. And the ways we do that is that it's in those moments that we tap into angelic help. So as soon as we feel those pressures, those anxieties, that stress that's coming to us, we can turn to angels, and they will immediately come into our presence and help us through it. So this whole process is going to happen again and again and again in our life. And the psychology community, the secular psychology community that disavows anything spiritual, they're getting it. They're getting aspects. They're calling it anxiety. They're calling it things that you can measure and things. But there are deeper things taking place. And when we see the deeper things, they can offer other strategies. You remember back in that dream sequence that I started with, I went to the Lord's Prayer to rescue myself in the dream. And that's a good way for us when we do feel that presence, that we can overcome it. In many ways, the spiritual body is a lot like the physical body. The physical body gets healthy and stronger by developing an immune system, right? Kids have to get coughs, right? They have to get colds. If you try to protect a child from ever getting a cough or a cold, or you're constantly putting them in a bubble, you're actually destroying the child's immune system for their life, what we see now. And that's something that can be dangerous when you overparent a child. So we build our immune system physically. The same thing happens spiritually. When we expose ourselves to these, at times, dark thoughts, evil feelings, temptations, whatever it is, the stress, anxiety, whatever we're going through, it's okay. We're developing our spiritual immune system, and we can rise up to a higher level in that. Now, the spiritual lens, if we look at the same 7 items that I mentioned that psychology would be recommending, if we look at that with a spiritual lens, we can go a little deeper. So the first one, if you remember, I said that was relaxation, breathing, and meditation. Well, on that one, that was the first one. That one, the secular culture is just catching up with ancient religious traditions, okay? Praying, meditation, and breathing have been long part of the spiritual path. Interestingly, in the Western world, we do get prayer, kind of combine it with meditation. We don't really get we don't get breathing that much. Much more in the Eastern religions, they do a much better job with it. So I think we're learning that right now, how to breathe better. You notice we breathe at the beginning of worship. For Swedenborgians, it's not very well known that Swedenborg got into his state that he would go into through a breathing exercise. So breathing is a very powerful way to change your state, and something we should learn to practice more. But if you want to learn that, you can generally learn that from yoga. Yoga teachers are really good at teaching that, and also yoga teachers are good with meditation. This past year, I took a breathing course. I did it online with a breathing teacher, and it was just incredible spiritually. Almost like psychedelic experiences happened. So developing that breathing system can be a real way to overcome and prepare and improve your spiritual immune system. When you're stressed out, you have a bad dream, you're thinking bad thoughts, at least just breathe. Just breathe continually through it. Just give yourself some breaths, and you can immediately shift your situation. So the second idea that was offered from the secular culture was have a healthy diet. And this, again, is something that is much more stressed than other religions. Other religions are much clearer about what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat, kosher, non-kosher, or vegetarian, and so forth. I think that's something, again, in the Western religions we're a little weaker in. We haven't really stressed it that much, but it's in our history. Now, Swedenborgians will be very surprised sometimes to learn that the first time Swedenborg had an angelic advice come to him, it said, "Stop eating so much." I mean, not exactly the spiritual wisdom we're expecting to hear, but he's saying basically, ease up on the food, dude. You're not going to be able to move in the spiritual direction if you just keep eating the way you're eating. And so Swedenborg, people don't realize, became a vegetarian pretty much. He occasionally ate fish, and he said, "I'll only eat red meat if it's offered at a guest house." And though he never really advocated vegetarianism, the earliest English Swedenborgians embraced a vegetarian diet based on Swedenborg. I think that that's probably going in the right direction. Most religions have some sort of practice, and I think we're all learning. I've been to a nutritionist. They all say the same thing over and over again. It's not a big argument, right? It's eat more fruits and vegetables, eat less red meat if you eat it at all, avoid alcohol, avoid preservative and processed food. So this is the marriage of the physical and the spiritual. Improving your diet will improve your spiritual immune system. So we have to take seriously. We're spirits in a physical body, but we have to respect the body while we're in it. The third suggestion we got from the psychological community was get more exercise. And another interesting tidbit about Swedenborg is that a lot of his hallucinations, or where he's speaking and he's going in heaven and he's getting these visions, he did it while walking, and he kind of mastered a walking meditation. And again, something we see less in the Western religions, but much more in the other religions, is that connection with the body, is that exercise is a very powerful way to improve your spiritual immune system and shift yourself out of negative thoughts. So making exercise a part of your daily life might not sound like a spiritual exercise. It actually is a spiritual exercise. So find some way to go for a walk, do exercise. It'll improve your spiritual immune system. So the fourth suggestion they offered was to join a support group. Well, hello, here religion has been doing this for a long time. So that's what we're doing today. And all religions, faiths, very few of them say you can develop your spiritual life by yourself. You've got to do it in a space. And I'm hoping that our space here, Church of the Holy City, our new space, our space online, that we can provide that space. I know we can, because I know that we all love and care for each other. And we can take time to not just join the support group, but I encourage you to combine something. In your prayer time, try to remember as many people from the church congregation as you can and pray for them. It's a wonderful practice of combining joining a group and caring about it. I pray for the group frequently, and I think it's a very important thing we could do for each other. But again, if it's not church, it could be a yoga, a meditation, a breathing group, a reading group. Alcoholics Anonymous and recovery groups are probably the most successful groups in the country right now for spiritual growth. So as church communities decline, we'll see a greater increase in anxiety in our culture overall, and it's important for each of us to make sure that we're tapped into something bigger than ourselves, a group. The fifth suggestion they had was to ask for help, and in the secular world, that generally means a health professional. In the spiritual world, it does mean asking for God's help, calling those angels in. It may be asking for direct help. You could call your pastor, but you could call anybody in the congregation, you could call a friend. But talking it out, even me talking about a bad dream out loud with a group, you're not alone. And we need to try to be that for each other. Someone that people can call on when they feel lonely or isolated, and knowing that we can call on God. I do encourage people to have a phrase, a mantra, some phrase you can recite when you are anxious, when you feel the anxiety coming. For me, it's the Lord's Prayer. That's the easiest. Another one is, for me, has been a phrase from the communion service. Holy, holy, holy Lord, God of power and might. When I say that, I feel angels come in and I can feel darkness step back. So whatever it is for you, some people like the 23rd Psalm, but you might want to memorize something that you can say in those anxious moments, and you will feel the darkness dissipate. So the sixth suggestion they said was to avoid drugs and alcohol. And I think a lot of religions have tried to deal with this through the years, but it becomes very clear the use of drugs or alcohol to create euphoria in our culture is really an attempt at spiritual bypass. We grow through the challenges that we experience, and we fool ourselves if we think we can escape through artificial means like drugs or alcohol. When they're improperly used. I know for me, watching the gay community suffer through the AIDS crisis in the 80s was horrible, right? 90s. But in the 2000s, crystal meth, ripped through the gay community and destroyed people's lives, and just almost as bad as the AIDS crisis. And so, when we take drugs or alcohol, recreational drugs or alcohol, to deal with a spiritual crisis, we're actually pouring gasoline on a fire. We're actually enhancing the dark spirits. So you don't want to do that. These demonic dangers of drug abuse are everywhere. And just last Friday, I woke up in my apartment, and I'm on the 4th floor with the windows closed and the air conditioning on, right? So I can't really hear that much outside. But I hear a dog, what sounds like a dog, yelping at a high pitch. And I look at my window, it's not a dog, it's a man. And he is going through fits. His arms are jumping and jerking, and he's going through fits and screaming, and he can't literally hold his body still. And it's clearly, I don't know for sure what it was, but it looked like convulsions from fentanyl, opioids. And we're seeing this all over right now. So it really, I just thought, I prayed for him. I called to get emergency services, who came right away. Thank you, Washington, D.C. And, but I thought, here is someone's brother, here's someone's son. This could be someone's husband. This could be this poor man. And so drugs, I think I don't need to stress, but they really can, they make things much worse. And so they're not a way out at all. Recreational drugs. If you're using medicines, that's a whole different thing. So I think with our spiritual lens, you can see we can take these psychological steps, go a step further to combat these moments of anxiety. A couple other things that we get from the spiritual language that we don't get at all in the psychological world is, in the spiritual world, we can discern who's talking to us. If you're hearing voices in your head that are gentle and non-controlling and loving, that's angelic. But if you hear voices that are telling you to harm yourself, how terrible you are judging you, these are not from heaven. So discerning where they're coming from can be very helpful. The other thing in this more spiritual action is we can be useful. We can go out and do something for someone. That is the fastest way to break from a negative energy, from anxiety, is to get outside of your head and go do something for someone else. I had a friend who was in recovery for many years, an AA, and he said whenever he felt tempted to go back and drink again, he called someone to see who he could help, and that shifted his energy completely. So when you're feeling that temptation, shift by saying, not just you can call someone for help, but also, how can I help others? And when we help others, we move out of that space. And then another is to purify your intentions. All we have to do is just simply ask that angels be with us. We don't have to have all the answers. Simply intending to be a better person, that's it. That's all it takes. When we say, I want to be a better person, simply trying to love more and hate less and be less selfish, we will grow spiritually. It won't happen all at once. It's a journey, but it is the right energy to make the shift. And then finally, for me, is reading scripture. We do it each week here. I think you're getting immunization. If you just listen to my boring sermons, but you do hear the spiritual readings, you're getting immunization, I believe, in a very healthy way. Again, no matter how bad the sermon, you're getting the word, and that's very powerful. So that's another one. What do we do when people come to us who are in the state? I don't have, it's going to be different for each person, but what I would say is don't judge them. It's, don't say, well, I kind of told you, avoid the temptation. What they really need is your love. So just love them. And it doesn't even mean having all the answers or having a 5-point plan or anything like that. Just love them and pray for their protection. You can pray for their protection. So these are some ways that we can grow spiritually and develop our spiritual immune system and resist temptations and anxiety and that dreaded feeling that we might have. In summary, find a time to pray and meditate and relax each day. Practice breathing exercises. Eat a more healthy diet. Exercise. Participate in groups. Ask for help. Avoid recreational drugs and alcohol. Discern where the voices are coming from. Find ways to be useful. Purify your intentions. And read the scripture regularly. So anxiety and fear of those anxieties and temptations are a natural part of human life. But we can develop these practices and they can help build our immune system so we can move through them very quickly and grow to the next level. Amen. I'm anxiously awaiting any comments or questions that people might have. Steve and Natasha, or Natasha? Steve and Natasha? Steve.
Yes, good sermon, but I think it wouldn't quite be complete without mentioning what Jesus commented on avoiding anxiety. And the way he put it, seek first God's seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness. And so we need to know what that means in practice. And I think most of what you said is related to that. And the other thing I want to add to that, though, is I thought Steve Park, Annabelle's brother, did a good job in his sermon talking about that. And he did, I don't think he put it that way, but he stressed this from the Old Testament, from Micah, I believe. What was it? Seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. So I think what you said, pretty much all of those things would fit into what Jesus said there.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah, I agree.
all I have to say.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's having those intentions, having that intention, seeking that first is really a good point. Thank you. Anybody else? Chris?
Yes, I have to say that this was a great thing for me to finally be able to tune into. For about the last 30 years, I have lived with a GAD, a generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis. And so, I mean, like, heaven knows, I've spent a lot of time with psychologists and have loved every moment of it. Yay! But in reality, I guess what I wanted to speak to particularly is all of the things that you have mentioned are kind of on a menu for me. And I have had great success with some. The other thing I would like to say is that you mentioned something about foods and so on and talked about vegetarianism. And I just wanted to say that when I was about 15 or 16, I met two good friends at Almont summer camp for the church. And one was Gretchen Worden and the other was Nina Tafel. And Nina, as you know, is a participating member at Temenos right now. But anyway, her friend Gretchen passed away quite well, maybe not unexpectedly, but many years ago. But before she died, she had become, I think, the curator or director, either one, of the Butter, I don't know its real name, museum in Philadelphia. They have those odd things, like here's somebody's jawbone and here's, but that's Gretchen. Anyway, Gretchen, uh, her mother, her heritage was Berica. So Berica and Tafel, for anybody who lives in Washington, D.C., if you go to the Smithsonian, there used to be, I don't know whether there still is, but they were a homeopathic organization. And they were one of the first. They were connected with Swedenborgian Church, not by, anything legal, but they were both, Berica and Tafel, at that point involved with the church. This is all natural treatments. And so they moved the entire, I understand, actually, I saw it, I remember, but I was quite young. Like all of the drugstore, the big counter and stuff, and the little boxes and all that stuff were relocated to the Smithsonian. And so I just wanted to mention that Swedenborgians have long been involved in, looking at your health from a natural perspective. That's it. Done talking.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think Berkey and Tafel was the first homeopathic pharmacy, and my dad recently gave me a gift of his father's homeopathic kit, which I put back together and cleaned all the bottles, and I now have in my cabin in West Virginia. So I'm keeping the little booklet of which each of them mean, and they're all still full of homeopathic medicine, probably from like the 1920s. But yeah, the Swedenborgians were very involved in the homeopathic movement, and and using natural ways of treating.
I
Thank you.
remember the two of them bringing all these little remedies to the church camp for a couple of years, you know?
Yeah, I didn't know about that. That's great. Thank you, Chris. Any other comments?
Rich, you have some comments in the chat.
Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, I didn't know that Sherry Smith says that that book, The Presence of Other Worlds, was the reason that she joined the Swedenborg Church. Breathing is life-changing. And that she's helping people with can you see that on the screen? COVID. And that she's seeing that shift. Thank you, Sherry. Are you still on there if you want to say more about it?
Yeah, I was just saying I resonated with a lot of the things that you said, and it wasn't the book you talked about with Presence of Spirits, which I haven't read that one yet, but it was his other one, The Presence of Other, which talks about Swedenborg. I mean, it explains Swedenborg, which I think is really a little bit about his work with the psychiatric patients.
Cool. What a cool guy he is.
He's
Thank
very,
you, Sherry.
yeah. It's really, this is such important stuff because it's not just with students. I mean, I see it with workplaces. Like I do a lot of coaching still for, superintendent teams and school district leadership, and people are really not okay, but they're way more open to me talking about it like, hey, it's energetic. This isn't just like a work thing you've got to deal with. This is like something deeper. And I never could have said that a few years ago. So it is changing.
Do you have any tools that you've seen that maybe I didn't mention?
I mean, they're all kind of connected, they're really all connected to the bringing in the spiritual realm. I mean, one of the things I've been thinking about is seeing, both the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual realities all through different lenses. So how can you see your physical self through the lens of the soul, versus just, oh, I need to get this drug, or I think that's where homeopathy comes from, or how do I see my emotional lens, not just saying my emotions are real, but acknowledging them, but also being like, from a spiritual standpoint, like, how can I elevate those emotions, or how can I feel those emotions and ask God for help to move to a different emotion. So I've been doing a lot of personal work on seeing things through multiple dimensions, and that kind of helps.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think we're in a time of integrating things back. And so there's no fear of science, there's no fear of spirit, there's no fear of the physical. Like they're all combined, but the fact that we've kind of put them in categories that you can't talk about this with this, I think, I love that you're integrating.
And Scott would say that listening to NDEs, that's his balm to his soul. He loves near-death experiences. And I actually think that's a way that God is communicating with people now, through people who have these experiences of the other realm and feel the love and can talk about that. So that's what my husband does. When he's stressed, he just plays an NDE.
NDE, near-death experience.
Yeah.
And I love them too. I didn't know there were groupies of NDEs, but now I'm a groupie. I love listening to them.
Oh.
Maybe I could do a sermon on that. I'll do a sermon on NDEs.
You should. Scott knows them all. He went to the conference. He talks to them.
Really?
He's like obsessed. This is his thing.
Oh, we like them probably is because they put your perspective on life. People who reflect back all say pretty much the same thing and what's important. And you're struck by, I just listened to one last week where a woman said she paid for someone at a grocery store on the way out of the store, and they showed her that as a great act of kindness. And then they showed that woman doing it for somebody else. And she thought to herself, of all the things I've done in my life, this is what I'm being noted for. And I love that. It's the little things we do for each other. So I like those too. Roxanne, you mentioned beads, prayer beads. You want to talk about that? Should we all get prayer beads?
Yes, you should. I would be really happy to make you guys prayer beads as a gift.
I would like them. Thank you.
But I do want to mention, and this is, the idea of demonic spirits being around. I know several priests, and I've actually done a little bit of research into this, and the rate of exorcisms is like at an all-time high. And the way that, you know, it's very scientific how they determine whether or not someone should have an exorcism. They actually have to go through a huge psychological evaluation. And so I think it's really legitimate. But I'm, you know, I think that speaks to the state of our world. And I've been really actively working on my relationship with my guardian angel. And my guardian angel does help me out. I lost my birds, and my guardian angel helped me get my birds back. So
there's a strategy, tapping directly into your angels. And also, about exorcisms, you know, the Catholic Church has a very, like you're mentioning, a very sophisticated process. It's not an easy process. And they do report a high surge of a demand for exorcists. People ask me what I think of that. I completely believe it. I've had people in the church community ask me for prayers like that. I just consider it prayers for people. I don't get really wrapped up in what it is. But if you're really, really stuck with what you are feeling are dark forces and you can't relent, then of course I do think that prayer, I believe in holy water, icons, anything you can bring to that person that would help them. So I've done prayers for people, and I don't think it's spooky or anything like that. It's just you're really stuck and you just need really special prayers. And you even see in their faces sometimes like a physical, it looks different. They don't look like themselves. So yeah, good point about that. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, so every so often I point out that my mother used to say there was a community of people that she was one of them that believed in Samuel Hahnemann homeopathy for the body, Emanuel Swedenborg for the soul, and Henry George, the economist, for the mind. My next door neighbor, and we've relied heavily on homeopathy, which I think Louise had never heard of until she met me, and have a complete collection of the remedies here. Not exclusively. I've been to the hospital with some interesting things that were not dealt with homeopathically. My next door neighbor, when I was a kid, Eleanor Peebles, was a prominent Swedenborgian and homeopath. She has an article in that big Swedenborg volume that you have one of in the church. And it's talking about the relationship, I guess, between homeopathy and Swedenborgianism. And her son was a doctor on the faculty at Harvard Medical. He was not a homeopath, but he brought her in every semester to give his students a talk on homeopathy.
Interesting to hear this in the family history. Malcolm.
Yes, it's interesting to me that states of mind or states of being that we think of as purely negative have positive sides. I think most evolutionary biologists would say that without anxiety, we probably wouldn't have survived. It's a survival mechanism, among other things. Billie Jean King famously said that pressure is a privilege. She was speaking of tennis players who make a great deal of money and undergo a great deal of pressure to do it. And I, in walking by Ida's grave every day for the last 6 years, still continue to grieve, but the grieving does not overwhelm. And I'd be, I think, saddened if I didn't feel some bit of grief over it. On homeopathy, it's interesting that the monument to Dr. Hahnemann, the father of homeopathy, is located just 4 blocks south of Church of the Holy City. It's a very interesting memorial, and I urge people to go there and check it out with its Latin inscription, Similia ab similibus curentur, like is cured by like.
Well, thank you, Malcolm. I always love your erudite histories and knowledge of these things. And in one of my nerdy moments, Malcolm, I found that the Church of the Holy City congregation members went down to that opening of that. They went to that statue being commemorated. Wouldn't mean anything to anybody today, probably in D.C. They wouldn't know who he is. But it was interesting how popular that idea was of using like natural elements to combat illness. Katerina?
So if we're saying that demons and evil spirits are responsible in some part at least for our depression and anxiety, is that the case for our physical health? Our reading today of Matthew seemed to suggest that there is a connection. What would you say to that?
I think it is connected, and the trick is not to get. So Jesus, one time someone's, various times people are asking him, what's the sin that this child has this disease, And Jesus says it rains on the just and the unjust, meaning that good and bad can happen, and illness can happen. So I think it's very, it's important not to make the jump that someone's ill, therefore God's punishing, or there's a spiritual punishment involved. But nuanced. Do I think that when you're wrestling with that anxiety or spiritual warfare, does it take a toll on the physical body? Absolutely, I'm sure it does, and you tend to see a difference in people when they can shift out of that state in their physical body, and so I personally, this is, with what little I know, I wouldn't be surprised if some cancers and some things that are just going into the body are not related directly to stress, worry, anxiety, and negative thoughts and those things. So I think that the mind and the body are very connected, and I think a lot of the scientific research is showing that right now. If you've noticed when you go to the doctor, at least I've noticed this and I hadn't seen it, but in the last 5 years, they always ask me, how are you feeling mentally, for the first 5 questions. All kinds of, so that must be the new thing. So they're clearly saying that if you're having a mental crisis, it's very likely going to play out in a physical crisis. And I would tie that, if you're in a spiritual crisis, it could play out in a physical crisis. So I think it's all interconnected, and we need to take care of our bodies physically, and then take care of our souls spiritually, and they're all connected. And the more we can just keep it all clean as we can, the better, and build our immune system for whatever the world's going to throw at us. So I do feel that they're connected. I don't believe in that Christian Science, which believes that illness is a sign of sin, in some ways grew out of Swedenborgian's ideas that thoughts are things, but it went a different direction, and it said that your evil thoughts therefore lead to sin, and if you can get rid of sin, you can get rid of any kind of illness. I don't buy that. I think that was a wrong turn, but there is a connection. Is that helpful? That's just my take. I don't know if that's right. Who knows?
It's helpful, and it's completely fascinating to me. Jim Robinson, who was a speaker a few weeks ago, had colon cancer, and he credits his healing from that through prayer, meditation, imagining cancer being gone, and almost like a spiritual fight, as well as all the things he did in homeopathic and in traditional medical way. But fascinating topic. Thank you.
What was the name of the Van Dusen book that you mentioned in your sermon, Rich?
The Presence of Spirit in Madness. I hope I'm getting it right, but we'll put it into the newsletter too.
Okay.
But it's a pretty fascinating read. Is there anything else I missed? And The Body Keeps the Score is a fascinating book about the connection. Yes. Oh, and I didn't know that the statue of Hanuman is the only medical statue in DC. But yeah, The Body Keeps the Score is a very popular book among very secular people right now. But it's basically showing that whatever is in your body, and I think we're also seeing that we inherit genes and so forth. We pass things down to children and generations. We're inheriting disease or stress or anxiety from generations. So that's fascinating as well. Okay, well, let's see. David says, listening to soft classical music has helped a lot. In the evening, I enjoy spending. That's a great point. Music is another really beautiful way to shift energy, and particularly spiritual music. Some music will shift you in the wrong direction, but classical music, for a variety of reasons, can shift you. And there's a lot of spiritual music in the church, and there's a lot of Eastern music. If you listen to, some of that music, it's clearly hitting a spiritual chord. And I know that Swedenborg talks about the angels singing in certain levels and how music is so important in heaven. So I think that's a great example of something I didn't mention. And yeah, you'll get the final comment, Roxanne, before we wrap this up.
Well, I just want to make a comment about the what's happening there is, and this goes very Swedenborgian, and I learned this through my harp therapy work and education. When you do that, you're creating vibration in your body. And vibration is very, very healing. And as we know from Swedenborg's treatise on tremulations. So, and also too, when we cry, we're creating vibration in our body as well. So having a good cry is a good thing now and then, because it's an attempt to not only express yourself in a spiritual manner, but it's creating vibrations in the body, and it's healing.
So if this service lasts any longer, people will burst into tears and we will have a spiritual experience. But keep this in mind this week, that you do want a good cry is a good way of purging. And also that when you do your prayers, you want to try the you're vibrating your body, which makes perfect sense. So thank you for that, our harpist in residence.
Yeah.
With that, we'll end our discussion, but thank you everybody for I just love our discussions, and the more places I go and the more I do, I realize how special they are, that we have such a complementary